The chipped formica of the news desk felt cool under Ben's forearms. 6:02 a.m., another day, another performance. He adjusted the microphone, the plastic a familiar, unwelcome warmth against his lips. Beyond the studio window, the Arizona desert yawned, bleached bone and scrub, already simmering under a sun that felt wrong, too bright, too insistent. "Good morning, Flagstaff," he began, forcing a cheerfulness he didn't feel. "Another beautiful high desert day ahead. We were looking at clear skies, a high of 85, and a gentle breeze out of the southwest. Perfect for a hike, a bike ride, or just enjoying the stunning scenery this state has to offer." He offered a practiced smile, the one his agent had told him projected trustworthiness and approachability. He felt neither. The knot in his stomach hadn't loosened in months, maybe years. He glanced at the monitors flanking the camera, the standard weather maps, radar showing nothing but benign blue and green, but overlaid, barely visible. A secondary feed displaying readings from his independent sensors, feeding instruments he desalvaged, rebuilt, and installed across the region after everything. The numbers flickered, a silent chorus of anomalies. Atmospheric pressure dropping at a rate that didn't correlate with any known system. Ionospheric disturbances. Unexplained electromagnetic fluctuations. He carefully omitted those details from his report. "Now, for those of you planning on heading up to the San Francisco peaks," he continued, smoothly transitioning to the weekend forecast, "expect cooler temperatures and a slight chance of afternoon thunderstorms. But overall, a beautiful outlook for outdoor activities." Another smile, another lie of omission. The camera cut to Janice, the morning anchor, a perpetually optimistic woman who genuinely believed in the power of positive thinking. She offered him a bright, supportive nod as he signed off. He killed the feed, and the studio lights felt suddenly harsh. He swiveled in his chair, staring out the window again. Watching the desert heat haze shimmer, he felt exposed, watched everything. "All right, Ben?" Janice asked, her voice laced with concern. "You seem a little distracted this morning." "Just tired," he mumbled, scrubbing a hand over his face. "Early start. You been looking tired lately? You sure you are taking care of yourself?" He managed a weak smile. "I am fine, Janice, honestly." He wasn't. The memory hit him like a physical blow, a cold wave washing over him. He hadn't thought about sivering that consciously, but it was always there, lurking beneath the surface. Asterisk, 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 the 12th of November, 2018. The Hayfield Conference Center, Phoenix. The room was packed. Meteorologists from across the Southwest gathered for the annual Regional Forecast Symposium. Then Dr. Benjamin Carter, rising star of the National Weather Service, was presenting his new predictive model. It wasn't just a model. He argued. It was a revolution. He de-woven in solar activity, geomagnetic fluctuations, even subtle shifts in the composition of the upper atmosphere timidity variables. Everyone else dismissed as irrelevant. Asterisk, asterisk, this isn't just about predicting rain or shine, he declared, his voice ringing with conviction. It is about understanding the dynamic interplay of forces that shape our weather. It is about anticipating the unexpected. MBD confidently predicted a mild winter for Arizona, a boon for tourism, a relief for farmers. He ignored the whispers of doubt, the raised eyebrows, the cautious skepticism of his superiors. He been certain, Saren. Could been wrong. 2 weeks later, the worst blizzard in Arizona history slammed into the state. Roads were closed, power grids collapsed, and dozens perished. The economic impact was devastating. The repercussions for Ben were immediate and brutal. He was publicly discredited, stripped of his research grant, and effectively exiled to this small, low-profile station in Flagstaff. The image of Dr. Evelyn Reed, his mentor, her face etched with disappointment, haunted him. "You reach for something extraordinary, Ben," she said, her voice devoid of its usual warmth. "But you did it without humility. You forgot that sometimes the simplest explanation is the right one." Humility. He lacked humility, driven by ambition, desperate to prove himself. He ignored fundamental principles of meteorological science. He become obsessed with finding patterns where none existed, with chasing theoretical anomalies, and he paid the price. Finney paid the price. Findy blinked, disoriented, back in the sterile confines of the studio. Janice was gone, already preparing for the next segment. He rubbed his temples, trying to shake off the weight of the past. A shadow fell across his desk. He looked up to see Old Man Tiber standing there, his face a roadmap of wrinkles, his eyes like chips of obsidian. Tiber was a fixture in Flagstaff, a Navajo elder who spoke mostly in riddles and possessed an encyclopedic knowledge of local lore. Most people dismissed him as eccentric. Ben usually tried to avoid him. "The Sky Serpent stirs," Tiber said, his voice raspy as dry leaves. Ben sighed inwardly. "Good morning to you too." Tiber, the wind, it whispers of scales. The earth, it trembles with its passing. Tiber ignored Ben's attempt at normalcy. He held out a small, intricately woven pouch. "My grandmother gave me this. She said it would be time again, to remember the old stories." Ben glanced at the pouch. It smelled of sage and something older, something like dust and stone. "I appreciate the thought, Tiber, but I am a meteorologist. I deal in facts and data, not stories." Tiber gazed in T-Waver. "Facts are shadows, young Carter. The real truth lies in the knowing. The serpent sleeps for generations, but when the balance is broken, it awakens, and its breath is not gentle." "The serpent?" Ben asked, trying to keep the irritation out of his voice. "What are you talking about?" "A spirit of chaos. The one who walks between worlds. The Navajo call it Nihijihina. You call it a weather pattern." Ben forced a laugh. "Right, a weather pattern." He glanced back at the monitors. The anomalous readings were growing more pronounced. The atmospheric pressure was dropping faster now, and the electromagnetic fluctuations were spiking. It wasn't following any recognizable pattern. It was organic, like a living thing. "You should listen to the land, young Carter," Tiber continued, oblivious to Ben's internal turmoil. "It speaks. If you only have the ears to hear, it warns when danger approaches, but too many have forgotten how to listen." He paused, his eyes fixing on Ben with unnerving intensity. "Your instruments, they sense it, don't they?" Ben didn't answer. He couldn't. Tiber's words felt like a cold hand on his spine. "The elders say when the serpent returns, the sun will weep dust." Tiber turned and shuffled out of the studio, leaving the scent of sage and a lingering sense of unease. Ben stared at the empty doorway, his mind racing. He tried to rationalize Tiber's ramblings, superstition, folklore, the product of a vivid imagination, but he could shake the feeling that there was something more to it, something ancient. He turned back to the monitors and zoomed in on the regional radar. Still clear, still blue and green. But the secondary feed from his sensors screamed a different story. The pressure continued to plummet. The electromagnetic disturbances were off the charts. He initiated a diagnostic scan of his instruments, checking for malfunctions. Nothing. Everything was operating within parameters, or at least, within the expanded parameters I had set. It wasn't a sensor error, it was real. He pulled up the wind patterns, analyzing the prevailing conditions. A high-pressure system was stalled over Nevada, pushing warm, dry air into Arizona, a typical desert pattern. But the velocity was increasing exponentially. He reran the simulations, adjusting the variables, trying to find a logical explanation. Nothing made sense. The models were breaking down, predicting conditions that were physically impossible. He glanced out the window again. The sun still burned with that unsettling brightness. The desert shimmered, and then he saw it, a dark line on the horizon. At first, he thought it was a dust storm, a haboob rolling in from the west. But this was different. This wasn't a localized phenomenon. This was massive. It stretched as far as the eye could see, a towering wall of churning dust. Blotting out the sun, it wasn't moving like a normal dust storm. Driven by wind, it was growing, advancing with a deliberate, unnatural speed. He grabbed his binoculars, focusing on the base of the wall. It wasn't simply dust. There were swirling shapes within it, like forms. Imperfectly defined, shifting and morphing, but undeniably present, he could make out what they were. He quickly accessed satellite imagery, hoping for a wider perspective. But the satellite feeds were static, completely disrupted. He tried multiple sources, different frequencies. Nothing. It was as if the dust wall was jamming all communication signals. He turned back to the monitors, his heart pounding in his chest. He rechecked his sensor readings. The atmospheric pressure was now critically low. The electromagnetic fluctuations were spiking violently. And there was a new reading, an anomalous energy signature emanating from the dust wall itself. It was impossible. He scrambled for his phone, intending to alert the National Weather Service to issue a warning. But the screen remained dark. No signal. He looked back at the window. The dust wall was closer now, filling the horizon. An immense, terrifying presence. It was just a weather event. It was something else, something primal. He remembered Tiber's words. Asterisk, the sun will weep dust. He remembered the Navajo elder's haunting warning, asterisk, the Sky Serpent stirs. The air in the studio grew thick and heavy, charged with an unnatural energy. He could feel the static cling to his skin, raising the hairs on his arms, and then he saw something within the dust wall that made his blood run cold. A shape, vague, monstrous, and undeniably serpentine. It rose from within the swirling chaos, a colossal form uncoiling against the bruised sky. The dust wall was upon them, and it was moving with malevolent intent. The impact was what Ben expected, not a roaring wind, a pelting sandblast, or even the gradual dimming of the sun. It was a silence, a suffocating absolute stillness that descended just before the wall hit Yuma. Then, a pressure change so sudden it made his ears pop, and the world outside the studio window dissolved into a swirling ochre void. He braced himself, expecting the building to shudder, to groan under the force of the storm. But the impact was muted, strangely. Focused, it felt less like being bombarded by a natural force and more like being enveloped by something tensional. The studio lights flickered, groaned, and held. Remarkably, the building seemed to be holding up. But the view outside was apocalyptic. The dust wasn't simply obscuring the landscape. It was replacing. Buildings were vanishing. Roads were disappearing, swallowed by the churning, impossible density of the storm. He wrestled with the broadcast console, trying to regain control. This is KFLG Flagstaff. We are experiencing unusual weather conditions. A significant dust storm has impacted the Yuma area. We are attempting to gather more information. His voice sounded thin, inadequate, even to his own ears. Janice was pale, clutching her chest. What is happening, Ben? It is like the world is ending. I don't know, Janice, he admitted, his voice tight. I honestly don't know. He attempted to access the standard meteorological data streams. Nothing. Satellite imagery was still static. Radar was useless, reflecting only a solid, undifferentiated mass of dust. His own sensor data was even more alarming. The atmospheric pressure had plummeted to an unprecedented low, and the electromagnetic field was oscillating wildly, creating a localized disruption that was interfering with all forms of communication. He ran simulations, desperately trying to reconcile the data with known meteorological principles. The models crashed repeatedly, spitting out error messages. The storm's behavior defied categorization. It wasn't following any predictable pattern. It was intelligent. Reports began to trickle in from listeners, their voices crackling with static over the emergency frequencies. But the reports weren't about wind damage or power outages. They were about strangeness. My dog, he has gone crazy, a frantic voice reported from a farm outside town. He is howling at the sky, come inside, and all the birds, they just vanished. Another caller, something's wrong with the radio. All I hear is static and whispers, like someone's talking under the noise. I can make out what they re-saying. A third, my electricity, flickering, and my compass is spinning wildly. It is pointing south, then north, then everywhere at once. Ben exchanged a horrified glance with Janice. These weren't the effects of a typical dust storm. These were anomalies, disturbances that suggested something far more profound and far more terrifying was at play. "We need to tell people to stay indoors," Janice said, her voice trembling. "To board up their windows to prepare for the worst." "I agree," Ben said. But even as he spoke, he knew it was likely too late. The storm was just a physical phenomenon. It was affecting people's perceptions, their sense of reality. He forced himself to focus, to think logically. He needed to find a solution, an explanation. He needed to understand what was happening before it was too late. And then, his mind drifted back to Old Man Tiber. He dismissed the thought at first, superstition, folklore, the ramblings of a senile old man. But the more he considered the strange events unfolding around him, the more Tiber's words resonated. Asterisk, the Sky Serpent stirs. The sun will weep dust. Sabi reluctantly pulled up his digital archive, searching for any information he could find on Navajo mythology, on the legend of Nahijihina. The results were unsettling. Nahijihina, the Sky Serpent, wasn't simply a weather spirit. It was a powerful, chaotic entity associated with drought, famine, and upheaval. The legends described it as a creature of wind and dust, capable of manipulating the elements and wreaking havoc on the world. It was said to awaken only during times of great imbalance, when humanity had strayed too far from the natural order. He scrolled through articles detailing historical accounts of similar events starts a pin. Massive dust storms accompanied by strange phenomena, unexplained atmospheric disturbances, and widespread panic. Many of these events coincided with periods of social unrest, ecological devastation, or spiritual crisis. He found a reference to a particularly severe dust storm that struck Arizona in the 1930s during the Dust Bowl era. Local Native American tribes had attributed the storm to the awakening of Nahijihina, warning of a coming darkness. Their warnings had been dismissed as superstition, but the storm had lasted for weeks, causing widespread suffering and devastation. The parallels were too stark to ignore. He focused on the sensor data again, searching for a pattern, a clue. He noticed something he'd overlooked earlier. The electromagnetic fluctuations weren't entirely random. There was a subtle rhythmic pulse within the chaos, a complex pattern that resembled a heartbeat. A slow, deliberate, monstrous heartbeat. He magnified the signal, isolating the rhythmic pulse. He ran it through a spectral analysis program, attempting to decipher its underlying structure. The results were astonishing. The pulse wasn't emanating from the storm itself. It was coming from footy beneath the earth. From deep within the crust, he felt a growing sense of dread. This wasn't just a weather event. This wasn't just a natural disaster. It was something geological, something primordial, something that had been dormant for centuries, now stirring to life. He tried to contact the USGS, the United States Geological Survey, but the lines were dead. No communication. The storm had effectively cut Yuma off from the outside world. He turned back to the window. The dust wall hadn't advanced further, but its density had increased. It was becoming darker, more opaque, as if it were solidifying. He could no longer see any landmarks, any buildings, any signs of civilization. Yuma had vanished, swallowed by the swirling chaos. Suddenly, the studio lights flickered violently, then died, plunging the room into darkness. Emergency generators kicked in after a moment, illuminating the space with a dim, flickering glow. "What happened?" Janice gasped, her voice barely a whisper. "Power outage," Ben said, trying to sound reassuring, probably overloaded from the storm. He checked the broadcast console, dead, no signal. They were off the air. He reached for his phone, hoping to establish some kind of external communication. But the screen remained black, no signal. Then his personal cell phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out, his heart pounding with a mixture of hope and apprehension. There was a new voicemail. He pressed play. The message began with a burst of static. Then a distorted, garbled voice spoke. It was difficult to make out the words, but one phrase cut through the noise with terrifying clarity. "Hayfield, November 12th. You should have listened." Ben froze, his blood turning to ice, the date, the location. His past failure, someone knew. Someone remembered. The voice crackled again, quieter, more menacing. The serpent remembers too, the connection cut off, leaving only a deafening silence. Ben stared at the phone, his hand trembling. The past had come back to haunt him. And this time, it wasn't just his career at stake, it was the fate of Yuma. And perhaps the world. The storm wasn't random. It wasn't natural, it was a reckoning, and he was somehow, inexplicably, at the center of it all. The emergency generator's hum was a persistent, grating companion in the darkness. Ben hadn't slept, hadn't even bothered trying. The distorted voice message played on repeat in his mind, a chilling echo of his past failure. Hayfield, November 12th, you should have listened. He'd initially dismissed it as a prank, a twisted joke. But the escalating strangeness outside, the unnerving accuracy of the message, told him otherwise. He'd spent the pre-dawn hours glued to the remaining functional computer terminals, diving deeper into the lore surrounding Nahijihina. His research led him down a rabbit hole of Navajo creation myths, ancient prophecies, and obscure anthropological studies. He discovered that the legend wasn't isolated to the Navajo. Traces of a similar serpent deity appeared in the belief systems of other Native American tribes across the Southwest. But the most unsettling discovery came when he cross-referenced the stories with archaeological records of the Hohokam culture, the ancient civilization that flourished in the Yuma region for centuries before vanishing mysteriously. The Hohokam were master engineers renowned for their extensive canal systems, which allowed them to control the erratic waters of the Colorado River and cultivate a thriving agricultural society. They also possessed a complex system of astronomical observatories, suggesting a deep understanding of celestial cycles, and they worshipped the serpent god. The depictions of the Hohokam serpent deity bore a striking resemblance to the descriptions of Nahijihina, a colossal serpentine creature associated with water, storms, and the power to both create and destroy. Ben found references to rituals performed by the Hohokam, intended to appease the serpent god and ensure a bountiful monsoon season. But there were also hints of a darker side to an attempt to soon-to control the monsoon, to harness its power for their own purposes. A hubris that, according to some interpretations, led to their downfall. He needed another perspective, someone grounded in local history, someone familiar with the area's hidden stories. He needed Maria Rodriguez. Maria owned the local historical society and library, a rambling, dust-filled building crammed with artifacts and forgotten manuscripts. She was a Yuma native, a walking encyclopedia of regional lore, and fiercely protective of her town's history. She'd been initially wary of him when he'd first arrived, but over the years they'd developed a grudging respect for each other. He found her sifting through a pile of old photographs, her face illuminated by a single lantern. The power was still out across most of Yuma. Ben, she said, looking up, her brow furrowed with concern. What are you doing here? Shouldn't you be on the air, keeping people informed? The station's down, he said, gesturing vaguely. Power outage. I need your help, Maria, with something. It is about the storm. The storm. Maria sighed. Oh, this storm, it is like nothing I've ever seen. Old man Tiber was saying it is the Sky Serpent waking up. You believe in that sort of thing. I'm trying to keep an open mind, Ben said cautiously. He recounted the strange phenomena, the anomalous readings, the distorted voice message. Maria listened in silence, her expression growing increasingly somber. When he finished, she shook her head slowly. This isn't the first time, she said. Yuma has seen storms like this before. Not as intense, perhaps, but similar, periods of extreme weather accompanied by strange occurrences. Wild animal migrations, unsettling whispers on the wind, people reporting visions. They always seem to coincide with times of unrest, times when the people of Yuma have strayed from the right path. You mean times of moral or spiritual crisis? Ben asked. Something like that. Maria said vaguely, my grandmother used to tell stories about the red wind storms that came when the people forgot their connection to the land, to the spirits of the desert. She said they were warnings, a cleansing. And the Hohokam, Ben asked. Do you know anything about their beliefs regarding these storms? Maria's eyes lit up. Now you're asking the right questions. The Hohokam believed that the monsoon was a sacred gift, a life-giving force. But they also believed it could be controlled. They built a series of canals and reservoirs, not just for irrigation, but as part of a larger system, a way to influence the rain. They had temples dedicated to the serpent god, ceremonies designed to appease it, to ensure a bountiful harvest. But eventually, they overreached. They tried to command the monsoon, to bend it to their will, and it turned against them. "What happened?" Ben asked, leaning forward. "Theories abound," Maria said. "Drought, famine, conflict with neighboring tribes. But I believe it was something more. I believe they angered the serpent god. They disturbed something they shouldn't have. And the monsoon punished them for their arrogance." Ben spent the rest of the morning combing through the Historical Society's archives, focusing on the records of the previous station meteorologist, Arthur Penhaligon. Penhaligon had disappeared without a trace 5 years ago, leaving behind a house full of unanswered questions and a reputation for eccentricity. Penhaligon had been obsessed with the same anomalies Ben was now investigating. He'd meticulously documented the strange electromagnetic fluctuations, the unusual animal behavior, and the recurring stories of anomalous storms. He'd also been researching the Hohokam, convinced that they held the key to understanding the phenomena. Ben discovered a series of cryptic notes in Penhaligon's files, filled with references to resonance frequencies, geomagnetic anomalies, and a hidden power source beneath Yuma Mesa. The notes were fragmented, disjointed, and difficult to decipher, but they clearly indicated that Penhaligon was on the verge of a breakthrough. And then he'd simply vanished, officially. It was ruled a missing persons case, unsolved. Ben returned to the radio station, his mind reeling. He had a growing sense of urgency, a feeling that he was running out of time. He wanted to examine Penhaligon's old office, hoping to find something, anything, that might shed light on his disappearance and the current crisis. The office had been largely untouched since Penhaligon's vanishing. Dust coated every surface, and the air was thick with the smell of neglect. Ben rummaged through the files, the drawers, the shelves, searching for clues. He found nothing. Just as he was about to give up, he noticed something peculiar about Penhaligon's old desk. It was a heavy, antique piece of furniture, made of dark, polished wood. He ran his hand along its surface and felt a slight give in one of the panels. He pressed on it, and a hidden compartment sprang open, revealing a small, leather-bound folder. Inside the folder was a map of the Yuma region, meticulously hand-drawn. Several locations were marked with small, red circles. He recognized some of them: puny, ancient Hohokam ruins, geological hotspots, areas with unusually high electromagnetic activity. But others were unmarked, hidden in remote corners of the desert. Beneath the map was a single sheet of paper, scrawled with Penhaligon's distinctive handwriting. The message was short but chilling: "Awaken it." The coordinates on the map led Ben to a desolate stretch of desert 20 miles east of Yuma, a landscape scarred by wind erosion and studded with jagged rock formations. The ruin, barely more than a scattering of crumbling adobe walls, blended almost seamlessly with the surrounding terrain. It had been largely ignored by archaeologists, deemed insignificant compared to the larger, more impressive Hohokam sites. He parked his SUV a safe distance away, the dust coating the windshield like a second skin. The air was thick with static, and his instruments were going haywire, the electromagnetic fluctuations spiking erratically. He felt a prickling sensation on his skin, a feeling of being watched. He approached the ruin cautiously, his hand resting on the flashlight at his belt. The silence was unnerving, broken only by the whine of the wind and the occasional screech of a hawk circling overhead. He entered the largest remaining structure, a small, rectangular room with a collapsed roof. The walls were covered in faded pictographs, stylized representations of serpents, birds, and geometric patterns. He recognized some of the symbols from his research associated with the Hohokam rain rituals. As he traced the outline of a particularly intricate serpent design, a wave of dizziness washed over him. The room began to spin, and the pictographs seemed to writhe and twist before his eyes. He stumbled backward, clutching his head. He experienced a flash of images, disjointed and fragmented, to a vibrant, bustling city bathed in sunlight. A procession of priests chanting before a colossal stone serpent. A sudden, cataclysmic storm engulfing everything in darkness. He felt a searing pain in his temples, a sensation of being invaded by foreign thoughts, foreign memories. Then, as abruptly as it began, it stopped. He blinked, disoriented, his heart pounding in his chest. The room was still, the pictographs were still, but something had shifted. He felt different. As if a piece of the past had been imprinted on his mind, he forced himself to breathe deeply, trying to regain his composure. He needed to analyze the experience later to try and understand what had happened. But right now he had a job to do. He needed to follow the map. The next location led him further into the desert, to a secluded valley hidden between two towering mesas. As he approached, he noticed something strange. A series of small, meticulously constructed stone altars had been erected near the entrance to the valley. They were decorated with feathers, flowers, and bizarre symbols painted in red ochre. And people, a group of approximately 20 locals, mostly farmers and ranchers from the surrounding area, were gathered around the altars, chanting in a low, rhythmic drone. They were dressed in simple, homespun clothing, their faces weathered and inscrutable. As he got closer, he realized they weren't simply praying. They were actively fitting welcoming "Eye the Storm." Their chants were not pleas for mercy, but invocations, calls for the Sky Serpent to unleash its fury. He parked his SUV and cautiously approached the group. "Hello," he called out. "I'm Ben Carter from KFLG. I'm just trying to understand what is going on." The chanting stopped abruptly. All eyes turned towards him. Their expressions weren't hostile, not yet, but there was a strange, unsettling intensity in their gaze. A man stepped forward, the leader of the group, a grizzled rancher named Silas. "You shouldn't be here," he said, his voice raspy. "I'm just a reporter," Ben said, holding up his hands in a gesture of peace. "I'm trying to gather information to warn people." Silas scoffed. "Warn people. The serpent isn't here to harm us. It is here to cleanse us, to wash away the sins of the modern world." "Cleans?" Ben asked, incredulous. "This storm is destroying everything. It is causing widespread damage. People are suffering." "Suffering is necessary," Silas said, his eyes burning with zeal. "The old ways have been forgotten. The people have grown complacent, materialistic, disconnected from the spirit of the land. The serpent is here to remind us of what truly matters." Ben tried to reason with them, to explain the scientific anomalies, the potential for catastrophic damage, but they weren't listening. They dismissed his explanations as the ramblings of a city dweller, a skeptic who couldn't comprehend the power of the ancient forces at play. "You think you can understand the serpent with your instruments and your charts?" Silas sneered. "You think you can control the weather with your technology? You are a fool." He looked around at the others. He is one of the ones who doubted. One of the ones who scoffed at the old ways. He looks at the world with blind eyes. The group began to close in on him, their faces hardening. He felt a growing sense of dread. He was outnumbered, isolated, and surrounded by people who clearly believed he was an enemy. The atmospheric disturbances intensified. The wind picked up, swirling around them in a chaotic frenzy. The air crackled with static. Ben checked his instruments. The electromagnetic fluctuations were reaching unprecedented levels, forming a complex rhythmic pattern. It wasn't random anymore. It was deliberate. A pulse, a heartbeat, synced with the chanting. He realized with a chilling certainty that these people weren't just passively accepting the storm. They were actively encouraging it. They were channeling the energy of the serpent, amplifying its power. "You don't understand," Ben said, his voice trembling. "This isn't about cleansing. This is about destruction. This is about unleashing a force that you can't control." Silas simply smiled. "The serpent is always in control. It has been since the beginning of time, and soon you will understand that too." He raised his hand, signaling to the others. They surged forward, surrounding Ben, their faces contorted with religious fervor. "You think your science can save you?" Silas spat, his breath hot on Ben's face. "You were wrong before, Dr. Carter. You predicted calm waters and a tempest came. You lacked the humility to see the truth." Ben's blood ran cold. They knew. They knew about Hayfield. They'd somehow unearthed his past failure, twisted it into proof of his inadequacy, his disconnect from the natural world. It wasn't just about the storm or the serpent deity. It was personal. It was a judgment before he could react. A rough hand clamped over his mouth, and another shoved him to the ground. The world tilted, and then went black. The taste of dust and fear was thick in Ben's mouth. He'd regained consciousness just long enough to be roughly dragged and tossed into the back of a dilapidated pickup truck. The journey was a jarring blur of bouncing over rough terrain, punctuated by the chanting of his captors and the relentless roar of the approaching storm. They'd driven for nearly an hour deeper into the desert, until they reached the imposing silhouette of the Yuma Territorial Prison, a crumbling sandstone fortress overlooking the Colorado River. It had been abandoned for decades, a decaying monument to a bygone era, but beneath its crumbling facade lay the final destination marked on Penhaligon's map. His captors dragged him into the prison through a crumbling cell block, and down a hidden staircase leading into the earth. The air grew heavy, damp, and charged with an almost palpable energy. The staircase opened into a vast cavern, illuminated by a network of flickering torches, and there it was, a cathedral of stone and technology, ancient and modern intertwined. The cavern was filled with a bewildering array of devices, intricately carved Hohokam artifacts, repurposed industrial machinery, and complex electronic components, all connected by a web of wires and conduits. At the center of the cavern, a massive crystalline structure pulsed with an eerie, ethereal light drawing energy from the surrounding devices. It was a machine designed to amplify and direct the monsoon's energy, to channel the power of the storm. It was also eerily connected to the increasing rhythmic energy signature. Ben detected, and orchestrating it all was Isabel, the charismatic force behind the local uprising. She stood before the crystalline structure, her eyes blazing with fervor, her hands outstretched as if conducting an orchestra of chaos. She wasn't a wild-eyed fanatic. She was intelligent, articulate, and utterly convinced of her own righteousness. "Welcome, Dr. Carter," she said, her voice echoing through the cavern. "I expected you would find your way here eventually. Arthur Penhaligon spoke of your potential, though he lamented your skepticism." "What are you doing, Isabel?" Ben demanded, struggling against his restraints. "This is insane. You're playing with forces you don't understand." "On the contrary," Isabel said, her smile chillingly serene. "I understand them perfectly. For too long, humanity has been divorced from the natural world, shackled by technology and greed. The Sky Serpent is here to restore the balance, to cleanse the world of its impurities." "You think unleashing a massive dust storm is cleansing?" Ben scoffed. "You're endangering lives, you're destroying everything." "A necessary sacrifice," Isabel said, her voice unwavering. "A small price to pay for a new beginning. The serpent isn't about destruction. It is about transformation, about awakening." She explained her distorted vision, how she'd discovered Penhaligon's research, deciphered the Hohokam texts, and come to believe that she was chosen to harness the serpent's power. She saw herself as a savior, a prophetess ushering in a new age. Ben knew he had to stop her. He had to disable the machine before it was too late. He thrashed against his restraints, testing their strength. They were tight, but not unbreakable. "You're delusional," he said, stalling for time. "This isn't about saving the world, this is about control. You want to control the weather, to control people." "Control is an illusion," Isabel said, dismissing his accusation with a wave of her hand. "I am merely a conduit for the serpent's will." She gestured, and her followers surged forward. Surrounding Ben, they were armed with makeshift weapons, pipes, clubs, and sharpened tools. "Destroy the machine," Isabel commanded. "Protect the serpent." The attack was sudden and brutal. Ben, despite his restraints, managed to duck and weave, evading the initial onslaught. He landed a blow to one attacker's jaw, momentarily stunning him, then used the man as a shield against another. Years spent hiking and exploring the desert had given him a surprising level of physical resilience. He managed to free one hand from his restraints, then the other. He fought with a desperate ferocity, fueled by adrenaline and a growing sense of dread. He wasn't a fighter, but he was fighting for his life, and for the fate of Yuma. He knocked down two attackers, then disarmed another, snatching a pipe from his grasp. He used it to create space, forcing his way towards the crystalline structure. Isabel, seeing her plan unraveling, lunged at him, her eyes burning with fury. She was surprisingly agile, dodging his blows and landing a sharp kick to his ribs. He stumbled backward, momentarily winded. "You can't stop it." "Dr. Carter," she snarled, "the serpent is too powerful. You're just a relic of a dying age, clinging to your obsolete science." "It is not about science," Ben gasped, struggling to his feet. "It is about respecting the forces of nature, about understanding your limits." He charged at Isabel, knocking her to the ground. He didn't want to hurt her, but he had no choice. He had to disable the machine. He turned his attention to the crystalline structure, searching for a way to shut it down. He noticed a series of control panels along its base, covered in ancient Hohokam symbols and modern circuitry. He began to frantically manipulate the controls, trying to disrupt the energy flow. The cavern trembled. The crystalline structure pulsed with increasing intensity, emitting a deafening hum. The air crackled with energy. Isabel, recovering from the fall, scrambled to her feet and lunged for a nearby console. She began to frantically input commands, overriding Ben's attempts to shut down the machine. "You're a fool," she screamed. "You don't understand what you're doing. You're going to unleash something terrible." He ignored her, continuing to work on the controls, systematically disabling the power conduits. He severed one connection, then another, the humming of the crystalline structure diminishing with each successful disruption. Suddenly, he realized Isabel had activated a failsafe. A hidden panel on the console slid open, revealing a single, red button. "If I can't control the serpent," she shouted, her voice filled with manic glee, "then no one will." She slammed her hand down on the button. A wave of energy surged through the cavern, illuminating the crystalline structure with a blinding white light. The ground shook violently. Cracks appeared in the cavern walls. Ben felt a surge of raw power course through his veins, searing his skin and threatening to overwhelm his senses. He knew, with terrifying certainty, that Isabel had unleashed a catastrophic release of energy, a final, desperate attempt to amplify the storm beyond control. She'd triggered a superstorm. The cavern walls began to collapse. He looked up and saw the storm no longer swirling Fodi Yuma, but focused directly Fodi onto Atu, a single immense eye of destruction bearing down on the town. A perfect alignment of atmospheric chaos and ancient power, ready to obliterate everything in its path. The cavern was collapsing around him, a chaos of falling rock and dust. Isabel lay unconscious amidst the debris, a twisted testament to her failed ambition. Ben ignored her, focusing all his energy on the crystalline structure, on the surging cascade of power threatening to tear the world apart. He'd glimpsed it during the energy surge, a fleeting understanding of the Hohokam technology. It wasn't just about amplification, it was about resonance. The devices weren't creating the storm. They were responding already present to something already present to be not deep. Geological pulse within the earth, a natural frequency that had been dormant for centuries. A frequency the serpent, or whatever force it represented, had somehow awakened. His initial attempts at disabling the machine had been misguided, treating it as a purely mechanical system. Now, he needed to work something with the resonance to disrupt the harmonic convergence and redirect the energy flow. It was a long shot, a desperate gamble, but it was the only chance they had. He stumbled towards the main control panel, ignoring the pain lancing through his ribs and the ringing in his ears. The panel was a mess of shattered screens and sparking wires, but a few key components were still functioning. He began to input a series of complex calculations, drawing on his meteorological knowledge, his understanding of electromagnetic fields, and the fragmented insights he'd gleaned from the Hohokam devices. He needed to create a counterfrequency, a harmonic distortion that would neutralize the energy surge and disperse it harmlessly into the atmosphere. It was like trying to defuse a bomb with a slide rule and a prayer. The energy fluctuations intensified, buffeting him with waves of heat and static. The cavern groaned under the strain, threatening to collapse completely. He could feel the storm raging above, growing more violent with each passing second. He checked his instruments, monitoring the energy flow. The initial calculations were off. The resonance was too strong, too deeply embedded within the earth. He needed to fine-tune his approach to find a more precise harmonic disruption. Suddenly, a section of the cavern wall crumbled, revealing a hidden alcove inside. He found a small metal box, its surface corroded with age. He pried it open, revealing a collection of Penhaligon's notes meticulously handwritten on waterproof paper. He scanned the pages, his heart pounding with hope. Penhaligon had discovered a vulnerability in the Hohokam technology, a specific frequency at which the crystalline structure became unstable. It was a narrow band, easily missed, but if he could hit it, he could disrupt the energy flow without triggering a catastrophic backlash. Of course, Ben muttered under his breath, a resonance frequency within the resonance frequency. It is always more complicated than it seems. He quickly incorporated Penhaligon's findings into his calculations, adjusting the parameters on the control panel. The machine responded, shuddering and groaning. The energy fluctuations began to subside, the harmonic distortion taking hold. But it wasn't enough. The energy surge was still too strong, too focused. He needed to redirect it, to channel it away from Yuma. He remembered the ancient Hohokam canal system, the intricate network of waterways designed to control the flow of water. What if he could use the Earth's natural energy pathways to dissipate the surge? What if he could create a conduit, a release valve for the pent-up energy? He focused his calculations on the geological fault lines running beneath Yuma Mesa, attempting to align the energy flow with those natural pathways. It was a risky maneuver, but it was his only option. He input the final coordinates, bracing himself for the inevitable backlash. The cavern fell silent. The crystalline structure pulsed one last time, then dimmed, its ethereal glow fading to a dull ember. The energy surge, instead of intensifying, began to dissipate, spreading outwards like ripples in a pond. He watched, his heart pounding in his chest. As the readings on his instruments stabilized, it was working. He was actually doing it. He had managed to disrupt the harmonic convergence, to redirect the energy surge, to avert the catastrophe. He stumbled back against a crumbling wall, weak with exhaustion, his body trembling with relief, but his victory was short-lived. As the energy surge subsided, a new phenomenon emerged. Directly above Yuma, a swirling vortex of sand and light began to form, coalescing into a funnel-shaped cloud that stretched from the desert floor to the storm. Rack sky. It wasn't part of the storm. It wasn't a result of the redirected energy. It was something else entirely. A localized anomaly, a concentrated expression of the awakened force, a manifestation of the Sky Serpent itself. The vortex pulsed with an eerie, otherworldly light, emitting a low, resonant hum that vibrated through the ground. It was beautiful and terrifying in equal measure, a swirling vortex of chaos and potential. Ben stared at it, mesmerized and horrified. He'd stopped the superstorm, but he hadn't stopped the serpent. He'd merely contained it, focused it. The effort had taken its toll. He felt drained, depleted, on the verge of collapse. His vision blurred, his limbs felt heavy, and the ringing in his ears intensified. He knew he didn't have much time left. He had broken the cycle of amplification. But what he'd unveiled, that was an entirely new and far more dangerous mystery. The vortex hung above Yuma, a silent promise of things to come. A single, swirling eye staring back at the world. The dust settled slowly, coating everything in a fine ochre film. The silence was almost as unsettling as the storm had been. Ben leaned against a jagged piece of the collapsed cavern wall, his body screaming in protest. He hadn't realized how close to the edge he'd been until the adrenaline began to fade. Maria Rodriguez found him hours later, digging through the rubble with a team of emergency responders. She'd insisted on joining the search, her face etched with worry. "Ben," she'd exclaimed, her voice hoarse. "Are you all right?" He'd managed a weak smile. "I think so, mostly just exhausted." She'd helped him to his feet, supporting his weight as they navigated the chaotic debris. Once she'd learned, he'd averted the worst of the disaster. Relief washed over her face. "You saved us, Ben," she said, her voice filled with gratitude. "You saved Yuma?" He shook his head. "I just redirected the energy. It was the technology, Penhaligon's research, and maybe a little bit of luck." But as they emerged from the ruins of the prison, they both saw it. The vortex, it hadn't dissipated. It hadn't spread. It remained hovering above Yuma, a swirling pillar of sand and light, a mesmerizing focal point in the otherwise desolate landscape. Maney feared it was a prelude to a second, even more destructive assault. The emergency services were preparing for the worst. But Maria, studying the vortex with a keen eye, offered a different assessment. "It is not expanding," she observed. "It is contained, and it is not causing any damage. In fact, I think it is. releasing something. She pointed towards the sky. Look, Ben followed her gaze, dark. Ominous clouds that had lingered over the horizon were beginning to break apart, revealing patches of blue sky. The wind, which had been howling for days, was slowly dying down. The atmosphere felt lighter, calmer. The monsoon season. Ben realized, his voice barely a whisper, it is subsiding. Maria nodded. It is as if the vortex is acting as a release valve, allowing the excess energy to dissipate harmlessly into the atmosphere. It is not bringing destruction, it is bringing balance. As the days passed, Maria's theory proved correct. The monsoon season, which had started with unprecedented fury, gradually returned to a normal pattern. The rains came, but they were gentle and life-giving, replenishing the parched desert and restoring hope to the community. The aftermath of the storm was still significant. There was widespread damage, and the economic impact would be felt for years to come. But Yuma had survived, and the vortex, slowly diminishing in size and intensity, had become a symbol of resilience, a testament to the power of nature and the enduring spirit of the people. Isabel and her remaining followers were taken into custody. Their motives remained a subject of fierce debate. Some saw them as dangerous extremists, driven by religious fanaticism. Others viewed them as misguided idealists, genuinely believing they were acting in the best interests of the planet. Ben suspected the truth was far more complex. He visited Isabel in jail, hoping to understand her motivations, to find some semblance of reason in her madness. She remained defiant, her eyes still burning with conviction. "You may have stopped the serpent this time, Dr. Carter," she said, her voice cold and unwavering. "But you haven't stopped what is coming. The world is changing, the old ways are dying, and the serpent will return, to cleanse and renew." He left the jail feeling more unsettled than ever. He'd stopped a disaster, but he hadn't solved the underlying problem. The awakening of whatever force resided beneath the earth. The resonance Penhaligon had identified remained a looming threat. In the weeks that followed, Ben found himself drawn back to the radio station. He'd initially intended to leave, to return to his old life, to try and rebuild his shattered reputation. But he couldn't shake the feeling that he had a responsibility to stay, to monitor the atmospheric anomalies, to watch for any sign of a recurrence. Janice, overjoyed to have him back, offered him a permanent position as the station's chief meteorologist. He accepted, a sense of purpose settling over him. He'd finally found a place where he belonged, a place where he could use his skills to help his community. He refurbished Penhaligon's old office, incorporating the salvaged equipment and data into his own monitoring system. He continued to study the Hohokam legends, piecing together the fragments of a forgotten history. He even began learning the Navajo language, hoping to gain a deeper understanding of the ancient beliefs surrounding the Sky Serpent. Life in Yuma settled into a new normal. The dust storms became less frequent, the anomalous phenomena less pronounced. But Ben never forgot what he'd learned. He knew that the desert held secrets that ran deeper than science, that the earth itself was a living, breathing entity with a will of its own. He kept a constant watch on his instruments, scanning the skies for any sign of trouble. He'd learned to trust his instincts, to listen to the whispers of the wind, to heed the warnings of the land. One night, weeks after the vortex had finally dissipated, he was reviewing the data logs when he noticed something strange. A faint blip on the radar. Too small to be a conventional weather system. It was fleeting, almost imperceptible, but it was there. A signal originating from deep within the desert, moving slowly towards the horizon. He zoomed in, magnifying the signal. It wasn't a storm. It wasn't a malfunction. It wasn't anything he could explain. It was something else. A subtle shift in the electromagnetic field. A barely detectable energy signature. A trace of the Sky Serpent, or something very much like it, still out there, waiting.